Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of tutorial 10. Now that we have looked at method of arrays, we can just think about going back to the calendar app. We basically created a table displaying the calendar's month and year. The first row of the table contains the 3-letter abbreviation of the 7 days of week, starting with SUN for Sunday and continuing through SAT, which is Saturday. Each abbreviation needs to be placed within an element with the class name calendar weekdays. So we have to basically repeat this 7 times. Now imagine if you had to repeat the same thing maybe 100 times or 1,000 times. So the code can be very unmanageable and long, and the errors, a lot of people could make errors in it. So the programmer deals with this kind of situation by basically creating something called a loop. Program loop is a set of commands that they can be executed repeatedly until a stopping condition is met. We have 2 common program loops. One of them is for loop, the other one is while loop. So let's look at the for loop. In for loop, a variable known as a counter variable is basically used to track number of times a block of a statement is run. So each time through this loop, the value of the counter variable is basically increased or decreased by a set amount. So the general structure for the for loop is this: for, start, continue, and update. Open parentheses, and then you can put your command in there. Start is basically an expression that sets the initial value of the counter variable. Continue is a Boolean expression that must be true if the loop is going to be continued. Update is another expression that indicates how the value of the counter variable should change each time through that loop. And basically commands are the JavaScript statement that can be run for each loop. So let's look at the example here. If we want to set a counter variable to range in from 1 to 4 and increments in 1, we can actually use the initial value like called var I equals 1. So the name of the counter variable in this example would be that I, which is common variable name that is basically used in most of the looping programs. The next expression that we said for the for loop defines the condition in which the program continues. So that's the Boolean thing that we are talking about. The following expression sets the loop to continue as long as the value of the counter variable is less than equals to 4. So we will have I smaller or equals to 4 because we want it to run until 4. And then the last part of our for loop would be the increment. So we said we want to increment it by 1, so it could be I plus plus. So that's the increment part that you're going to have. So the example that I provided would be something like that, but the variable I equals y, and that would be smaller than 4 because we wanted to go only up to 4. And then I plus plus in this case. Another thing that's important in here is basically a command block. A collection of commands that is run each time through a loop is called command block. Basically, the command block is indicated by its opening and closing curly braces, and you can use that in there. So these are basically the the loop counter values that you're going to have. So in here, you will have different counter values that you could have. This is up to 60. So you can use this increment by however you want it. I mean, what could be the problem? You can use that increment to go to that number. As you can see here, this is minus minus, so it does the opposite of plus plus, so it decrements. So I minus minus, it's decrementing. So now let's look at the while loop. The while loop in which a command block is run as long as a specific condition is met is similar to the for loop. But there is a difference. Unlike the for loop, the condition in a while loop doesn't depend on the value of the counter variable. So basically the general syntax for the while loop is while continues, open braces, and command, close braces, where continue is basically that Boolean expression. We also have do while. Do while loop generally used when the program loop should run at least once before testing stopping the condition. It tests the condition to continue the loop right after the latest command block is run. The structure for the do while is do, open bracket, commands, open braces, while continues. So in this example, the while loop continues as long the value of the I variable remains less than equals to 4. Each time through the command block, the loop writes the value of I into table cell, and then it can increase the counter by 1. So this is actually increasing that counter by 1. The next thing that we are going to look at is comparison operator. Basically, comparison operator compares the value of one expression into another, returning a Boolean value indicating whether the comparison is basically true and false. We have a list of comparison variables here and an example for each of them. So equals equals, the example is x equals equals, means that test whether x is equal in the value to the y. So the next one we have 3 equals. Basically that means we said the double sign test whether the two items are equal in value. The triple one test whether the two items are equal in value and also in terms of the data types. And so on. You can use the other ones as well. Other operators are called logical operators that allow several expressions to be connected to each other. The logical operator and returns a value of true only if both of the expressions are true. So in this case, these are the various operators that we have, and we call them logical operators. Basically, this means and, this means or, and this means not. So the example here, you have the x. So we are using triple equal sign, means they're testing in terms of value as well as the data type. So if this is true and this is true, so in here this operator basically returns a value of true only if both of these are true. So true and true. But this one, only one of them if it's true. And this means not. So basically in this case we are testing whether x is not less than equals than 5. Now let's look at program loops and array. Program loops, they can be used to cycle through the different values contained within an array. The general structure for it is basically using the for loop where I equals 0, so that's initialization, I is smaller than array length, and this is the increment, I plus plus, and then you will have the commands that are involving the array. So the array contains the values to be looped through, and I is basically, as we discussed before, is the counter variable used in this loop. JavaScripts also basically they support several methods to loop through the content of an array without having to basically create a program loop structure. Each of these methods is based on calling a function that will be applied to each item in the array. So we are going to look at the array methods to basically loop through our arrays. The first is the general syntax. We have the array.method callback. So where this array is the carry, method is the array method, and callback is the name of the function that will be applied to each array item. So basically this is the name of the function that is being applied to each of the array item. And this arg, a callback optional argument that can be included to pass a value of the function. So this is basically optional in this case. So you might wonder why we are going to use this method. Why not that program loops? Is because these are built in JavaScript language, so they are faster than the program loops. But one of the downside is the browsers might not support them. So basically we have to be careful when we are using these methods. The general syntax for the callback function is basically this. This is the syntax for the callback function. So what does the value mean? Value is the value of the array item during each pass through the array. Index is basically the numeric index of the current array item. And array is basically the name of the array. So only the value parameter is required and the other one is basically optional. So the value parameter is the only one that you need to have and the rest could be optional. Now let's look at how to run a function for each array item. The first method that we are going to look at is for each method, which is basically used to run a function for each item in an array. There is a syntax for it, as you can see in here. So this callback function is that's applied to each item in that array. So this is an example. For each method applies the sum array method. So the for each method is basically applying the sum array method. For each of the item in the X array. The sum array function here. So the sum array function has a single parameter named value, representing the current array item. The result of running for each method with the sum array method is that the value of each item in X array is added to some variable. So each of the item in X array is added to the sum variable. Then we are going to, if we add them, the result would be, the final value would be 26. The next thing that we are going to discuss, mapping an array. Another method is map method. Basically performs an action similar to the for each method, except that the function it calls return a value that can be used to map content of the existing array into another new array. So in this example here, we can see that basically method to create a new array in which the item is equal to twice the value of the corresponding item in the original array. So the value that are basically returning is equal to twice the value of the corresponding item in the original array. So after we run this code, the Y array contains the value which will be 6, this will be 16, and this will be 24. So the map method doesn't affect the content of the array. And the new array will have the same number of array items from the original one. So it's not going to touch the content of it. If original array is sparse with several missing indices, the map array will have the same sparses. So whatever the structure of the first array is, for the new array will have the same structure as well. Another one that we are going to look at is filtering an array. When we work with array, we want to extract array items that match some of the specific condition that we have. For instance, in an array of test scores, we might want to extract only the test scores with certain values, maybe value of 90 or something. So let's look at how we write that. So we're going to have the structure would be array.filter, callback, and this, where the callback is the function that returns a Boolean value of true or false for each item in the array. The array items that return a value of true, they get copied into the new array. So that would be, so we are going to have those ones, the array items that return a value of true will be copied into the new array. So basically, this is such an example, like if you want to get the values of greater than 90 to kind of say like these are the grade A's, you can actually use it using the filter method. So you can create a sub-array of items whose value is basically greater than 90. So after we run this code, basically after you run it, the high score array would contain only 92, 91, and 95, because these are the only ones that are going to be greater than A, and these are grade A's. Another thing that we are going to look at is basically we will look at every method. So basically, we are going to look at an array's content to determine whether every array item satisfies a specific condition. The every method returns the value true only if every item in the array matches the condition specified by the callback function, and if otherwise, it will return false. So this would be the structure of how we write that. And another one that we're going to look at is basically the sum. So the sum method returns a value of true if some array items matches a condition specified in the function, but otherwise it returns false if none of the array items match the condition specified in that function as well. So this is basically summarize of the different JavaScript array method that can be used to work with collection of items within that array. We have talked about each of these array method, and this is basically a summary of where you can use these and for what purpose you can use these array methods. This will conclude section 10.2 of this week's lecture. Next week we are going to look at section 10.3, and we are going to talk about conditional statements. Also next week you will have a quiz of basically chapter 9 and 10, which will be JavaScript. So you will have a quiz on JavaScript, and we will cover chapter 9 and 10. Have a great week. Bye bye.